Hey guys, Loam02. I put a couple videos up on this deck that you have in front of you right now, and it's a deck that I've been working on over the course of this week since the inception of a new ban list. What I was going to do today is do a deck tech on the deck itself, and as opposed to covering the entire mana base, which we can go into detail if you want to, but realistically, like we don't really have to. We'll start in the second pile right here, let off with Volrath's Stronghold. So this is a Sultai control loam list. It utilizes the card Life from the Loam right here that I'm moving to generate overwhelming advantage in the mid to late game and then win. So the actual package, the combination package that is generally associated with Loam, once you have Loam going, is that you get Dark Depths, Thespian Stage, and you can recurse generation of 2020s. If you get Volrath's Stronghold, you can recurse creature threats, which are in the sixth pile right here, or most of them are, and or Wasteland, and against decks that have more robust or how would you say it, inspired mana bases, you can just demolish their mana base once per turn. So this first pile right here is really the engine of the deck, and we'll go through and kind of cover how the deck disrupts to get to that point in the game. Because one of the issues you'll find on this deck, which is similar to any control deck, is that against hyper aggressive strategies, you tend to scramble in the first 3 to 4 turns, so you don't die, so you can achieve control over the game. Okay, so moving into pile two here, you have the actual counter magic package, which is actually very low for this deck. There's not a ton of counter magic inside this deck. We actually only have 6 literal counter spells inside the whole deck. So Spell Snare, I think, is in a strong place right now. One, is very efficient, and two, it gets Stoneforge Mystic, which is a card that can close out the game relatively rapidly. And it also gets most of the other counter spells that we're going to be afraid of. I also have Counter Squall in here. I'm running it over Negate because it obviously has an additional effect on top of it that Negate does not. And color fixing in a deck that has Life from the Loam and can recurse its fetch lands tends to be able to fix pretty easily. We also have Mana Drain because that allows you to go into one. It's probably the most powerful counter spell ever printed outside of like Force of Will, which is probably better, but obviously comes at a steeper cost. But against the right deck, it's better. Like sometimes you just need to stop them on turn one. But Mana Drain allows you to go into, some of your Planeswalkers, your bigger threats on a much faster timetable because the deck's really not a ramp deck. Counterspell, just good old fashioned counterspell. Mana Leak, which is just a very efficient counterspell. And then Daze, which is again very efficient. You'll note that we do not have in this deck Force of Will. One, our blue card count is a little lower in this deck, so it's not always going to be assured that we're going to be able to use it how it's intended to be used, which is pitched. Um, and two, I don't really. This is a deck that is trying to control through card advantage, so I really don't want to be pitching cards to Force of Will to stop, early threats. I'd rather allow early threats to resolve and then sweep them. The next pile here is just the Planeswalker pile. Realistically, they could probably go into separate piles based on function. Garruk is really just ramp and then a recursive threat, so we can go in one of these two piles right here, just a threat in general. Jace can be a threat. Realistically, he probably belongs in this pile, which is just card advantage. But he also wins the game. And then Liliana could probably go into this pile right here, which is just pure disruption. But it works. They all work pretty well with the concept of the deck. So Liliana works well with Loam, obviously, because if you're discarding Loam, you can recurse it back, get more lands. If you're discarding land, you can get them all back. You can get 3 of them back with Loam, which makes Liliana a lot stronger, and she's already a powerful card. Garruk, he's just generally good. He can make 3/3s. He can pump your team for a fast win. He can generate, basically 2 additional mana on the turn following his inclusion on the board. And then Jace is just a win con plus a card advantage engine on an open board, which this deck's trying to manufacture. You're generally not going to be casting these Planeswalkers on curve. You're generally going to be trying to counter their spells or set something up so that you can stay alive until like turn 5 or 6, and then you're probably resolving one of these, possibly with counter magic backup, but after generating the Loam engine. So this next pile you have is our ramp pile, our ramp and disruption, because Deathrite Shaman does an awful lot. And as you'll note, we're going through, like, these cards don't always fall into perfect piles, because a lot of them, and in 100 card, I think you have to do this, serve multiple functions that the deck wants. So this card can ramp us, so that's why I put it in this pile, but it also disrupts graveyard strategies, which is very important, because now with Loam in the format, like, it's going to be important that we are able main deck to disrupt graveyard-based game plans because of cards like Intuition, because of cards like Mystical Tutor. There's a lot of things that can set up some pretty broken graveyard shenanigans very early, and having Deathrite on turn 1 be a very powerful play. One, I mean, it puts you to 3 mana on the next turn, and two, if you have to in a pinch or you think your opponent's reanimating fat, you can just get rid of it with 1 green mana, which, buys you basically a 2-for-1 at the cost of your card that you'll still have. Birds of Paradise, just nothing really does it better than these guys. As far as mana fixing goes, and as far as early ramp, so they're in the deck. Exploration, this card goes up a lot in my estimate. When you have Life from the Loam and you're able to make or have multiple additional lands per turn, Exploration goes up quite a bit in my estimate. This card also combos well with Crucible of Worlds when you have a bunch of fetch lands, which this deck does. This deck runs a significant number of fetch lands. And Sylvan Caryatid. This is a great hedge card. I've always been a big fan of it. It is a 2 mana ramp card, which tends to be in a rough spot in the format, but having hexproof and being able to block most of the 1-drops like Red Deck Winds has, or like any of the aggro like 1-drop white cards, is actually pretty damn good. And the card itself is just in a good place because I mean, unless they're going to Council's Judgment this, which is like spending 3 mana to kill a 2-drop that just makes a mana, which is bad. It's really tough to get rid of unless they're like edicting or something like that. And even if they're edicting, like it tends to be fine for you because you're using their mana and cards to not impact the board, which tends to be okay for this deck. Like you kind of want them to be doing that kind of thing. All right, so going to this next pile, this is the pile I call the threat pile, but it realistically a lot of the cards, this card right here, especially like Snapcaster starting at the bottom, branches off into many other piles. Snapcaster can be disruption, which is this pile right here, disruption removal. It can be a counterspell, which is still, I guess, disruption, but it's permission. It can be a wrath effect or a sweeper effect right here, or it can be, discard, pure disruption right here. I guess this would not be disruption. This is creature kill, or permanent kill. This is hand disruption, and this is permission. Snapcaster can do all of it, plus he puts a 2/1 body on the board. Tarmogoyf is just a pure threat. He just gets very big really fast in this deck. When you're loaming, you're dredging a lot of cards into your graveyard. That's how the card works. You end up casting it, getting 3 lands back. You dredge it back the next turn, put 3 into the graveyard, put 3 cards in the graveyard. And then, if you have a card like Volrath Stronghold, you can start recursing threats that you ditch in the graveyard because you're obviously blind flipping 3 into the graveyard when you dredge. Any lands, obviously Loam can get back. If you ever get, a couple other cards up here, Eternal Witness, you can recurse your threats back with it, or you can recurse counter magic back, whatever you want. But Loam kind of tends to work good with that. And, with a card like Tarmogoyf, it just makes it big really fast. Lotus Cobra could probably be in this pile right here as far as mana goes. It's a fine threat. A 2/1 body for 2 is fine, but what it does with fetch lands is just busted. When you're playing a fetch land and getting 3 mana for that land on the turn it comes into play, extremely strong. So nothing really does it better in the 2-drop than Lotus Cobra because it also attacks. Tireless Tracker, the next one here. This is a card advantage engine that works very well with fetch lands as well, which will be recursing back with Loam. So it generates cards and is a great threat. It just kills relatively rapidly. Eternal Witness, obviously great with a card like Life from the Loam because I can get back any of my cards that I, incidentally ditch with it to beat the opponent. Scavenging Ooze, same story, but realistically, like this is a more relevant card in the format now. It's always been in the format, and I think most green decks always run it because it's a great hedge. But now I think it increases in relevancy because reanimation style strategies and loam style strategies like this deck are going to become bigger. And I actually played a game against player Johnny Rogue the other night where we were in the loam mirror. He was in more of a rock build. I was in this bug build, and he got to loam before I did, and he was able to get 1 land card back with it. But I was able to eat it with my Scavenging Ooze and then find my own loam and win with it. So I think when you start thinking about cards like Life from the Loam, you need to have a game plan to your deck unless you're going to win really fast, to be able to get rid of it over the long game before it generates crushing advantage. The next card in here is Courser of Kruphix, just a great 3-drop, 2/4, blocks all day long. This deck will have issues with aggressive decks, so you see a lot more life gain in this deck, and this card included. Being able to get card advantage off of it as well, it could go in this pile, it could stay in this pile. I mean, it gains life, it's just big, has a big butt, and just blocks everything. Same thing with Finks. Finks is realistically card advantage as well against most decks because you block a Goblin Guide and it dies. Maybe you get a couple lands off the Goblin Guide. It comes back. It blocks something else. Maybe kills and trades with a couple things before it finally dies. And then maybe you can find a Volrath Stronghold, recurse it, and because in some matches, like Finks is one of the best things you can be doing. It's just a great tempo play against the aggressive strategies. True Name Nemesis is a pure beater. It's just very good at what it does. You get this thing on the board, and like if they don't have a Wrath or an Edict or something like that, it's going to kill them eventually, or it's going to buy you a ton of time to get the inevitability you need for Life from the Loam to do its job. Leopold could go into a couple piles as well. He is disruption as well as just being a decent threat. Also is very good against the control decks. Anything trying to draw more cards, he just tends to beat. So I really like his placement in this deck as well. Obstinate Baloth is the next one. This one's a little more questionable because Obstinate Baloth is just a beater. In control matchups, he comes out more often than not because we don't really care as much about the life gain. But against like aggressive style strategies or anything with a lot of discard, like indiscriminate discard, Obstinate Baloth is one of the better things you can be doing because, you put him on the board, like red is going to have a tough time killing him with one card, and he gains you life, which is essentially equates to like a couple cards from red as well. So very strong card. We have Thrun in this build. Partially, mostly because I like him, and two because like he's just a very resilient threat. So he kind of falls like the only pure threats in this that are not kind of like techier threats are probably like these three cards. So Thrun, True Name Nemesis, and Tarmogoyf are like the only pure threats. Like they don't really have high synergy with the deck. They're just pure threats that just put them on the board. You don't have to do a lot to defend them, or they're cheap. Like Tarmogoyf. Tarmogoyf obviously can be target removal, but I mean he can't. It's hard to lightning bolt a Tarmogoyf. True Name obviously can't be targeted. Thrun obviously can't be targeted, so you got to have specific answers for them. So that's why I kind of like them. So they kind of work to disrupt the opponent. The next one is one that I think most folks know. It's Tassiger here. He has a card advantage engine. He's a very cheap threat for the size. He's kind of like another Tarmogoyf, but it's not uncommon to use his ability to get cards back. Thragtusk, kind of similar to Obstinate Baloth and also Kitchen Finks. It's obviously a lot more expensive, but it gains us a ton of life. Is a very resilient threat. Like even if you kill it, it comes back as a 3/3, and you gain 5 life off it to buy a lot of time to continue your game plan, which is going to be a lot slower than other folks. I guess I misspoke. This is kind of a pure threat too. Titania is kind of our top end pure threat that doesn't really do anything other than like kill them. Titania is awfully expensive, but with Loam in the deck, or Loam now in the format, I think she's in a good place. I did consider Gitrog Monster for this deck because I think it's very powerful with the Loam engine. And if I went that direction, I would probably go more of a Loam combo style deck, less controlling and more combo-ish, and probably use like Fast Bond and some stuff like that. This deck does not have Fast Bond; it has Explore because this deck really doesn't have a way to exploit, having 10 mana on, not 10 mana, but having like 6 mana or 5 mana on turn one. I mean, yeah, sure, it could randomly have one of these threat cards in its hand at the opening, but if I'm going that route, I would probably do it a little differently. I'm not, so I just like her as a top end threat because the turn you play her, you can put like 15 power on the board, and just force them to have a Wrath or something like that to answer it. So this is the kind of the threat pile, and you can see that a lot of these cards also kind of fall into different roles and do a few more things. The next pile here is the tutoring pile, and some of these cards could fall into different piles. Like Green Sun Zenith could go to ramp because it gets the Dryad Arbor, which is the top of my mana base right here. But obviously it's hard to tutor. The next one's Mystical Tutor. Mystical Tutor 9 times out of 10 gets life from the Loam. In some matchups, it goes to get a board card, or it goes to get like a Wrath effect, like Toxic Deluge or Damnation, possibly Pernicious D. I'm not Pernicious D, but Damnation or Toxic Deluge is what it generally goes to get in the aggressive matchup. But 9 times out of 10, it gets the life from the Loam, so we can start the engine. The next one is Intuition here. Intuition, what it tends to find is the engine as well, but it finds 2 other cards. So more often than not, the pile that you'll see me pick up is going to be Life from the Loam, Dark Depths, and Thespian Stage. If I'm already advantaged and just want to close the game out. Another pile that I could grab is Wasteland and Raven's Crime, so that I can, eat apart their hand, eat apart their mana base if I'm like in a control stall or something like that. And I don't think 20/20s are the best way to win the game. Another option that I've yet to use, but you could use, is Vorash Stronghold with another piece of this combo right here. Those tend to be the 3 cards that you opt to give them. Life from the Loam is generally always in that pile, but then it's one of these other cards. So Raven's Crime with Life from the Loam, and I guess I didn't describe the engine. The way the engine works is, one, you can make recursive 20/20s with these 2 lands and Life from the Loam. Wasteland plus just Loam itself is repeatable land destruction. Vorash Stronghold, just getting this on the board while you're on an active Life from the Loam allows you to get back any creatures that you dump into the yard when you dredge it back every turn. And then Raven's Crime essentially says, all right, I cast my Life from the Loam for 2, I pay 3 mana, ditch all the free lands I got off Life from the Loam, and you discard 3 cards. So you're essentially just grinding their hand out if they're a control deck and they have a sizable hand. And I think you saw that in one of the matches I played against Michelle. That was kind of a route we went. The tutors, you have Crop Rotation, which I think is a fine card because when you have Loam, you can recurse your lands if necessary. And also, if you happen to randomly have one of the half this combo right here, you can Crop Rotation into the other half of it and kill them on the spot. At times, I've had to Crop Rotation for Wasteland, stuff like that, but it's just a powerful, flexible tutor in a deck that doesn't really care about blowing up its own lands to trade it for a different land. Then you have Brainstorm, which it's not really a tutor, but it is filtering. I just put the filtering inside this same pile right here. With this many fetches in a Loam deck, Brainstorm's very powerful, and when you're able to get rid of the trash in your hand, depending on the matchup, and fetch to what I call purify your top deck, it's pretty strong. Same thing with Ponder, Preordain. Two fairly similar effects. I think in order of power in this deck, it's probably if you have a fetch, Brainstorm's the most powerful. The second most is Ponder, but Ponder can be better if you do not have a fetch land than Brainstorm. I think it is better than Brainstorm if you don't have a fetch. And then Preordain's easily the third most powerful, but it's still a great card. I mean, you get to filter your draw step. Trophy Mage primarily goes to find Crucible of Worlds, which is in the card advantage pile over here. But it can go to find a Sword of Fire and Ice and also the Sword of Light and Shadow. Primeval Titan, obviously it's a threat as well, but it also finds you your Dark Depths combo or finds you whatever land you may need in this pile. Maybe it's man lands. Generally speaking, it's going to be 2 of these 4 right here, so you can end the game. The next pile we have here is the board or permanent disruption pile. Stifle is kind of in here. It's kind of in a weird place in the deck. Stifle does a couple things, so it does disrupt some permanents. I guess, yeah. I mean, so the biggest reasons here, one is LD. You can kill a fetch land with it when they pop it to Surge. The other reason I put it in is because I think it's great against Stoneforge Mystic, and it's actually pretty decent against Planeswalkers as well. If they're going to Planeswalker Ultimate and you stifle them, it's pretty darn good. Or it can stop them on a critical turn. Reclamation Sage, I don't think it's in a bad place right now, and with Loam Recursion and the ability to recurse this card off Volrath's Stronghold, it provides a good answer against enchantments and or artifacts. It's basically like an upgrade to Uktabi Orangutan. Abrupt Decay, just a powerful card. 3 and under permanents, they're gone, and it's uncounterable. I like Golgari Charm a lot because it's a good hedge card. Against the hyper aggro decks that have a lot of X1s in their deck, you can basically make it a Wrath of God. Destroying enchantments is good. Obviously, Rest in Peace is a problem for this style of deck. And then regeneration of your creatures, I haven't had that come up yet because typically speaking, I've ground the opponent into basically they're hellbent, and they have no cards in hand and they've been reducing their resources. So that's not really. I don't generally play this as an aggro deck. You can, in some cases you do. Like against blue white, you just generally are the beatdown. So it could be relevant there, but it's just a flexible card. Hero's Downfall is a new one that I think gains for this deck. I think it's a necessity because you want to be able to destroy planeswalkers. This really isn't for creature threats per se. I mean, against green decks that ramp into big things, you may want to use it there for a creature. But I tend to like this for planeswalker threats more so. Go for the Throat, just an efficient card that kills most threats in the format. Not all, but most. Fatal Push, same deal, very efficient. Dark Blast, it works for the dredge mechanic. It has a dredge mechanic for one. It's also very good against aggro, which aggressive decks are going to be the most challenging for this style of deck. So that's our permanent disruption. On the in the next pile here, we have what I'm calling card advantage, but a lot of these cards already provide card advantage. These are just pure card advantage cards. Some of them are beatings too. Like the swords are just beatings, but the idea with this sword right here, excuse me, guys. Sword of Light and Shadow is that with Loam, we're going to be putting a lot of indiscriminate cards into the graveyard. And while we're doing that, if we can hook this thing up to a man land or to any random threat that we have in the deck, we can get back more significant threats from the graveyard and provide ourselves a lot of card advantage. It also gains us life, which in this deck is extremely relevant because we tend to get beat down pretty hard in the early game. Sword of Fire and Ice is just an all-around great card. Gains you life, doesn't gain you life. Generally speaking, it can be a 3-for-1. So you get the card itself. You get to draw a card if you ever hit them with it, and you can generally blow up smaller or lesser creatures if you're hitting them with it. So I tend to look at this as being almost a 3-for-1 card. If you're able to land it, hook it up, and swing with it all in one turn. Crucible of Worlds. A lot of folks were putting this and Life and Loam on the same power level. I think Crucible is far less powerful than Life in the Loam. It is far more flexible though in what it can be played in. Life in the Loam is the engine of the deck. Crucible is an added advantage that is obviously tutorable with cards like Trinket Mage or correction Trophy Mage right here. But it's still just whatever you have in your graveyard. You're not using it like Life in the Loam where you're getting card advantage every turn and you're also generating more options in your graveyard for further turns. Sylvan Library is currently in here. In the board, because I'm testing it right now, I don't think it's a great board. I think it's either a main card or not a card at all. Is Search for Azcanta. You know, I, I like the card a lot, and I think it would be great in this deck, but I don't think I need two effects like this in here right now, and I don't know which is better. I think Sylvan is slightly better because the matchup I want Sylvan Librarian as a card advantage card where I am drawing off of it is going to be the control matchups, the control mirrors, if you will. So in the control mirror, like I'm generally doming myself for 8, like every time when I first get to activate this. Just one to either get Shaft out of the way or just to get deeper in my deck and generate card advantage because I think I'm going to tend to win more games I do that in. But Sylvan Library is terrible against aggro, so it's going to come out 9/10 out of the time, and we're going to bring in either our red deck wins hate or our white hate, or our death mark, whatever. Like it's just not a great card against aggressive decks. Next is Treasure Cruise, just pure draw, 3-for-1. 2-for-1 dig through time, plus it's, like basically 2 impulses that go, 1 card less deep than 2 impulses would for half the mana. Then we have Fact or Fiction, which is great with graveyard-based synergies because you're dumping the ones you don't take into the graveyard, which makes your opponent's decision making even harder. And it's vast card advantage, and it's easy to cast. It's 4 mana, but it's only 1 color requirement. Coiling Oracle also in the deck. Coiling Oracle is awesome in this deck. I haven't played it in any other deck in a while, but I love it in this deck because one, it either ramps you so it could kind of fit in this pile, or it just draws you a card. But it's a great blocker. You just throw it out and block an early threat, and then because you're eventually trying to get to like a Wrath, and if you ramp, like you're 1 turn closer to your Wrath. Saves you a lot of life because you get to block with it. So it's just great. Same with Baleful Strix. Baleful Strix, a great blocker. They can both obviously carry swords as well eventually if someone just leaves it in play. Against control players, they can carry a sword and they draw you a card. So they're kind of like a free threat against control. And then against aggro, they're just a free blocker. It's like, yep, here you go. Like, go ahead and attack into it. Yep, I block you. It's dead. Cool. But I got another card out of it, so I'm not down a card. Then Wall of Blossoms. Wall of Blossoms is great versus aggro. You draw a card off of it. It's a 0/4, so they have to attack into it and generally spend a bolt to kill it to get it out of the way so they can keep on attacking with their creatures. So it saves you a lot of or buys you a lot of time and doesn't cost a card. Pernicious Deed. All right, so Mass Removal is the next pile here. You have Pernicious Deed, which is just a great board wipe. Does not work well against Planeswalkers, but everything else it tends to kill. When you're on a big mana situation. Toxic Deluge is very efficient. Obviously, you have to spend life to use this, which can be dangerous against aggro, but in a pinch, you Mystical Tutor for this thing and wipe their board. It's probably going to be a good game. And I think if you were watching some of our previous matches with this deck, we did Mystical Tutor for this once to kind of blow out White Weenie and set up a point of dominance. Then Damnation because it's just we're not playing white. This is about as good as they get is Damnation for getting rid of a lot of creatures. The last pile here is just Hand Disruption. Hymn to Turak is just a 2 mana 2-for-1. And then Collective Brutality I actually like a lot in this style of deck because discarding an additional land, escalating it with a Loam recursion on to even 3 is fine because you loam back 3 lands, ditch 2 lands, cast Collective Brutality, and you gain 2 life, they lose 2 life, you kill one of their minor threats, and then get rid of their most relevant sorcery or instant card in their graveyard or in their hand. The mana base itself is not that interesting. It does run 3 basic lands. It runs the maximum amount of man lands possible inside this color combination. So it has the Lumbering Falls, the Hissing Quagmire, the Creeping Tar Pit, the Fairy Conclave, and the Treetop Village. I believe the only one it doesn't have is like the 1/1 Drudge Skeletons lands because that land's just bad. We run an Urborg because we are also running a Maze of Ith inside this deck right here. It's a great land for recursion. We do, of note, run 1 Caracas because it's a spell land, and we don't ever cast white with it, but it is essentially a colorless mana if we need it to be. And then it also runs the tapped Scry lands, 2 of the tapped Scry lands right here, to filter draw. It's a good effect. A couple things I'm thinking about. I think I may take out a couple. I'm gonna relook the mana base and see if I can put in the new cycling lands. I don't like the old cycling lands because they only fix for one. Plus, they're not actual land types, so they're not like forest or swamp or whatever. But the newer ones that actually cycle and can be fetched, I think are pretty strong in a deck like this because when you cast Light from the Loam, it allows you to essentially turn them into Whispers of the Muse if you want them to be, and then you can keep on getting them back with Light from the Loam with a cycling land. It's a pretty powerful effect in this style of deck. I also, but the downside to them is I don't really care to have lands that I know are probably going to come into play on tap. If I did that, I'd probably take Sunken Hollow out and put in the cycling one, the cycling blue black land. So that's the deck. I hope I split it down into a way that's kind of more comprehensible. Just looking at how we've organized the deck, just from mana base alone. But it is a Loam engine deck at its heart. Has a lot of ways of tutoring that, and most of the creatures have high synergy with it as well. You start looking at our board here. We do run a Bajuka Bog because I think Bajuka Bog becomes more powerful when you have a crop rotation Primeval Titan in the deck. It also can be something that's found with Intuition as well, and then Loam Recursed to blow them out. Of note, you can also one trick play. Once you have an exploration in play and you can play 2 lands, you can wasteland your own cards, loam them back, and then if they're a spell land like Bajuka Bog kind of is, you can play it back again and kill their lands. Also have a Tormod's Crypt and a Nile Spellbomb because I think graveyard matters based strategies are going to become bigger in this format. So I wanted 2 effects that are not universal on graveyards, i.e. not blowing up mine, but can target theirs. I can activate the draw on the Nile Spellbomb, which is good, and then Tormod's Crypt is just an efficient answer that's good against most graveyard-based strategies. You have a standard anti-red deck wins base strategy right here. Flash Freeze is more flexible, can hit green-based decks as well. But we're committing one more. We've committed 6 cards in the board against them, and actually Dispel will tend to come in against them as well. So I think it's actually pretty good against red deck wins. Like it gets their Fire Blast, gets their random like burn cards. You have Duress, which is in the sideboard right now because I don't actually of note have Thoughtseize or Duress or Inquisition in this main deck because they're just 1-for-1 answers, and I wanted this deck to play out more like a rock deck and have most of its answer cards be 2-for-1s and just kind of grind them out, not be like a 1-for-1. Like 1-for-1, if I'm playing like Thoughtseizes and Inquisitions, I want my deck to have like to be more of a tempo style deck. Like I'm going to do this to slow you down, and then I'm going to play a threat, attack you with the threat. Then I'm going to disrupt you some more, keep on attacking you with this threat over and over and over again. Keep on disrupting your hand so you can't deal with my threat, and then eventually just win. This deck doesn't really win that way. I mean, it's more of a grindy style strategy. It's not like I disrupt you turn 1, play my threat, and then basically kill you with that one threat because I continue to disrupt you after I played that threat. But I think Duress is good enough against some of the combo style strategies or possibly control decks that I do have it board because I think it's a good card. I do like it better of note, and then this could be sideboarded against red deck wins as well. I don't know if you do or not. It's close because there are some cards that are not supposed to, like just Sulfuric Vortex or whatever. You just want to get out of their hand. Dread of Night, anti-white tech. White's kind of big, and I think white White has a lot of hate cards as well. So like if they're an aggro white build, I tend to like having both access to Virtue's Ruin and Dread of Night, and they're decent synergy with our deck. Deathmark, good against white, also good against the green decks. So like the bigger green decks, I don't tend to think we're horrible against green decks because like they're a little bit slower than like the decks that play Savannah Lions turn 1 or Goblin Guide turn 1. So we have like basically like an extra turn or 2 against those style of decks, which allows us to get into a bigger mana situation and cast our cards like Damnation or play our own resilient threats to kind of block them out and buy more time. Search for Iskanta is experimental right now. Like I said, I really like it against control. I mean, like I may leave it in the board. I don't know. It may be a main deckable card in this deck too. I don't know. I mean, it's very synergistic. Like getting to put cards in the graveyard is great for this deck. We're already going to be doing that a decent bit if we get the Loam engine online, and then turning it into a land that impulses are basically supreme, like 1/2 of Supreme Wills or impulses for 1 extra mana. To look for spells is pretty good because the deck obviously has 25 critters, but has a decent number of spells in it that are all pretty powerful. Or planeswalkers, etc. So pretty interesting card. Obviously, I can't get lands with it. I can't get creatures, but I have a decent number of spells that are decently powerful in the deck as well. I mean, you may need a Wrath. You may just want a Treasure Cruise. You may just want to dig through time, and it works very well with the Delve mechanic. So even just having this in play to cast Tasigur is good. Cast either of these 2 powerful draw cards right here, very good. Um, this is a card I'm testing. I think if I were to play this as a singleton deck without a board, I may play it main because I think it makes you a lot stronger against control and mid range. But against aggro, I don't think it's good. I think it's actually actively bad against aggro to play something on turn 2 that's not going to do anything until the next turn. Um, Sylvan Library is already in here, like I said too, and Sylvan Library is the one that's competing with Search for Esconta. I think they have similar effects on the game. Obviously, Search for Esconta, when it initially gets in, cannot draw like Sylvan Library can the turn after it comes into play. So I think Sylvan's a little more powerful because I think shaping the game in the early turns of it is very important. So this is the deck. I think it's actually a pretty fun deck to play. It is very powerful, but it can be overrun. What tends to overrun this style of deck is just hyper aggressive strategies. Red deck win style strategies very good against it. Um, aggro white pretty good against it. I think red is probably like red deck wins is probably the best deck against this style of deck because we're just going to be hoping to gain life and then just kind of like we're hoping to like gain threat or get threats to race them with because it's tougher for us to gain. We can gain some life. I mean, we have like all the best life gaining cards like Obstinate Bailout, Thrag Tusk, Kitchen Finks. But we can't gain just hordes of it. So if they're able to go 1 drop, 2 drop, 3 drop, or 1 drop, 1 drop, 1 drop, turns 1 and 2, and then like 3 drop, like they can easily outrace us. Like just because this deck takes a little while to set up. But on the whole, I think it's very good. I think it is very difficult for Control to beat this deck if they're not able to stop the Loam engine very rapidly. I mean, if they let it last for like 2 turns, like the Loam engine probably will beat them. Um, and against mid range, I think we're pretty well set up to fight as well. So I hope you guys enjoyed this deck tech. I hope it was at least informative of this deck I've been testing out for the last couple days. And if you want to know more, go ahead and submit some comments on it. And I don't know, I probably will try to play this deck out this next weekend because I think it's a very fun deck. And it does some pretty cool stuff. And it is legitimately like an actual control deck. Which I don't think was as viable in the old format. I think, due to the inclusion of like, a couple new cards like the draw that you see up here, Loam is a big part of it. Loam is this deck. Like this deck is circulated around the power of Loam. You're able to get the advantage that you really need in the mid to late game to win with control. And I'm kind of happy about that. I think it has opened up viability. So that's this deck tech. And if you guys have anything, let me know. And I'll see you this next weekend. Take care now.